So the key component of this stage of the experiment is to engage people's willpower. The second part of the experiment has all of the subjects separately engage in another challenging task. And the challenging task that they are asked to engage in is to solve a particular puzzle. And again, different experiments use different puzzles, different experiments use different contexts, but the original experiments that Baumeister and colleagues did had people try and solve a puzzle that could not be solved. So it's very, very difficult. In fact, it's impossible. But the subjects weren't aware of that. And then what was measured was how long subjects persisted in trying to solve this impossible to solve puzzle, depending on whether or not previously they had to resist the radishes, which is pretty easy to resist, or resist the cookies, which is at least harder to resist, and for some people would be very, very hard to resist. Now, you can probably already guess what the outcome of this and similar studies was, because it birthed this entire belief camp within the field of psychology that willpower is a limited resource. The outcome was that if people had to resist the cookies, which is harder to do than resisting the radishes, that they would persist for less time when they had to try and solve a puzzle that, unbeknownst to them, could not be solved. Conversely, if people had to resist something that was pretty easy to resist, such as resisting eating radishes, something that for me would be very, very easy to resist, well, when they were subsequently faced with trying to solve a very difficult, indeed impossible to solve puzzle, they persisted much longer. Okay, so put very simply, this study concluded that if you have to resist one thing and it's a hard thing to resist, well, then you have less, air quotes here, resistance in you, willpower, to engage in another difficult task subsequently. Whereas if you had an easy challenge just prior or no challenge just prior to being faced with a challenge such as a very difficult puzzle, well, then you had more resource, more willpower to apply to the solving of that puzzle. So the conclusion that Baumeister and colleagues drew from those results was that willpower is a limited resource. But it didn't specify, nor did they specify, exactly what that limited resource is. And this was quite an attractive theory because it jived well with most people's perception of what willpower and tenacity was for them. This idea that, yes, there are things that challenge us, both to do and to resist, but that we can do that. But when we are asked to do that again and again and again, while we may build up some capacity to engage our willpower and tenacity, and of course, there are those rare individuals that we've heard about and some of us know that seem to have just a kind of bottomless reservoir of willpower and tenacity. Most of us have an intuitive understanding of how hard it is to constantly be in friction with life, to constantly have to push ourselves to do things and to resist things. And that while that capacity can expand and grow and we can get better at it, that there does seem to be something here, just subjectively speaking, there does seem to be something about engaging tenacity and willpower that, yeah, it can feel good, but it also requires effort, this neural energy that we were talking about. So that raised the question of, okay, if willpower is a limited resource, what exactly is that resource at a physiological level? So Baumeister and colleagues subsequently went on to explore what I think is a really interesting and clever idea. Of course, if you're excited to do the 100 jumping jacks at the end of the run, that's not going to be a good avenue into activating and increasing the volume of your anterior mid-cingulate cortex. Everything we've talked about up until now supports the statement I just made. Easy tasks, desirable tasks, don't do it. It's the thing you don't want to do. So imparting these little microsucks can be very useful. You'll have to think about what particular microsucks you incorporate into your exercise routines, your cognitive routines, and your daily routines, and how often. I don't think you need to go completely berserk on this, doing them all day long. But keep in mind that these are the sorts of behaviors and resistance of behaviors, because again, certain microsucks might be, if you're somebody who practices intermittent fasting, we don't want to send you into the realm of eating disorder, but maybe you really do wait an extra 15 minutes before your usual first mealtime, which for me would really suck. That might even move from microsuck into macrosuck because I like to eat when I'm hungry, but waiting a few extra minutes for no other reason than allowing oneself to activate that anterior mid-cingulate cortex circuitry would be one way to try and build up one's tenacity and willpower. So at some level, this should all seem pretty logical. It actually doesn't even require a firm understanding of the underlying neuroscience for it to kind of make sense, right? You want to do something, you resist doing it. That's building up tenacity and willpower. You don't really want to do something, you do it. That's building up tenacity and willpower. Well, I do believe, in fact, there's a lot of data to support the fact that our understanding of the mechanisms underneath things like tenacity and willpower can be very advantageous when trying to carry out these different types of behaviors to increase tenacity and willpower.